It's 2025 and a new year means brand new opportunities. And for a lot of you out there, I know you've been thinking about one thing over the holidays, and that is starting your own business. But you have so many questions like how do I get started? How do I come up with a brand? How do I even sell stuff to people? And what am I even going to sell? Now take a deep breath. Shopify has got you. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. And you can get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. You don't have to be a coding nerd or a design geek to get this done. All you need to do is drag and drop. Shopify also helps with the details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard, so you can focus on the important stuff, like growing your business. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/truecrime, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/truecrime to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/truecrime.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back, everyone, to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, with my young at heart co-host, Brett.
Hi, Alice. Thank you so much. I'm young at heart, much like this year. This year is young and new and so exciting. I'm full of optimism.
Like 2023, it's got to be our year, right? 2020
Exactly.
wasn't, 2021 wasn't, 2022, it's like still, didn't it start with like Omicron or Delta, one of them?
I'm just hoping that this year I am sick less than half of the year. If I'm sick less than half of the year, I will consider it a victory.
I hope so too. You have had it rough the past couple of years. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I soldier on. Nobody wants to hear my complaints.
Well, I am really glad to be recording with you because I love the holidays, obviously, but it's like you have no routine. We had a lot of visitors coming in and out. My kids didn't have school, and I didn't know up from down and what day was what. And so now finally we're still easing into a routine, but I'm really looking forward to just having routine back. And part of the routine is getting to sit down and record with you.
I know. It's exciting. And I feel like we have been off of our routine for a while, and it's nice. It's nice to be back on it.
Indeed. And we have to say, part of the reason we've been off on routine is there's been so much hard-hitting true crime news, and we've tried to react in real time with you guys through Delphi and also, of course, the Moscow, Idaho quadruple murder. This is the first time I think we've sat down to record a pre-researched show for legal briefs in a while. But that's all good because it means that we've had a lot to talk about. And, you didn't even comment on my awesome pun, young at heart, because Brett,
It was an awesome pun.
Thank you.
It was an awesome pun.
Today we're going to talk about what being a child means in the eyes of the law, and when being a child in the eyes of the law means you're treated differently or not differently. And is that fair? And should we do that? And we have a great case for you today to kind of extrapolate on that question.
And it's a case a lot of you will have heard of just because it's so terrible and jarring that the facts of the case get to you, and it presents one of those really difficult policy questions that really no system is meant to handle. All systems, this is an interesting thing, and this is an aside, a complete aside, but I think people forget that basically any system that's designed to handle 95% of the cases well breaks down with a 5%. It's always going to break down. There's never going to be a perfect system you can design that is going to perfectly handle all 100% of the cases, because some cases are really difficult and they're basically impossible to deal with, and you just have to do the best you can, and that's what you see happen. And we're talking today about this case out of Wisconsin where a 10-year-old shot and killed his mother. It's a tragic case, And it's a case in which this 10-year-old is, at least at this point, going to be tried as an adult. And that's created a lot of discussion, a lot of angst, a lot of people questioning whether or not that's a good idea and why you would do that and how the juvenile justice system works in general. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about it. Number one, it's a subject that we don't have a lot of expertise in. I've never really handled juvenile justice questions. I would be interested if there are people out there who are sort of steeped in this to hear your thoughts on it. But it's something you could talk about. Really, you probably have a whole podcast on this question of how to deal with juvenile justice. So obviously, we're just going to scratch the surface, but it is something we wanted to address.
Absolutely. So what you've heard so far is that a 10-year-old boy shot his mother. Now, it wasn't an accident. In fact, he was charged as an adult for murder after he shot his mother when she refused to buy him a virtual reality gaming system. And he was angry about this. So he was mad at her for waking him up early because of this gaming system. And he knew where she kept her keys to the gun safe. He got the keys, he opened the gun safe, retrieved a pistol, and shot her in the head, killing her. After the murder, he used his mom's Amazon account to order that virtual reality headset that she would not buy him.
And I think it's important to just say right off the bat, I mean, this isn't an accident. This is a premeditated murder. This 10-year-old decided he was going to murder his mother so he could buy this VR headset. Those are the facts, and I don't think you can dispute them.
And one more thing to add to that, not only was it premeditated, but there shows to be a lack of remorse after the killing. So oftentimes we can see premeditated murder, but then maybe panic afterwards or trying to cover it up. But in fact, he shows kind of this cold-heartedness that after he kills his mother, he gets onto her account to buy the very thing that he wanted. Now, according to reports, this child suffers from serious mental health issues. I think the story we just told you, probably a lot of you are nodding your head, of course. Now, he has uncontrolled rage and acts out, and he had been seeing a therapist who made what was described as a, quote, concerning diagnosis, though the details are unclear on what that is. Now, this boy had previously attempted to set the house on fire, and his mother had set up camera systems around the house so she could watch him at all times because of this propensity to act out and do dangerous things like set the house on fire. Now, he showed no remorse, as we just said, for killing his mother. And when he spoke to his grandmother about it after the fact, he asked her if his package had arrived from Amazon yet, as if a complete disconnect. You know, she's talking to him about the murder, and he's just concerned about whether his gaming system has arrived.
Yeah, this is not surprising. Fortunately, it's just not a thing that children tend to do, to kill their parents, unless they have some really deep-seated issues. He obviously did. There's a lot of, obviously, you've got a child here, you have mental health issues, you have health issues. This is a case that is going to proceed under a lot of secrecy, a lot of non-public information. So we may never really know all the details of this case. I mean, we may, depending on how things go. I don't think we will. And these are things that you have to remember when you're thinking about this case, because this is a headline case, right? This is a case where most people only know the headline. 10-year-old shoots mother, tried as an adult or charged as an adult. And people just sort of run from that point forward. But once you start looking into this, you just realize, man, what a complete mess this is. And just what a really impossible situation to handle, and to handle in any way that's going to satisfy most people at the end of the day. So, I mean, the reason we're talking about this is because he is going to be tried as an adult, or at least that is the initial story. Most states have a minimum age after which a child can be charged with a crime. In Wisconsin, that age is 10. So if he had been 9, then just as a matter of law, he would not have been able to be charged with a crime. There probably would have been some civil procedures that would have been taken into account, things like maybe some sort of civil commitment to really get to the bottom of what's going on with him. Something like that might happen anyway at some point. But what would definitely not happen is he would not be charged with a crime. He would not have a lawyer, face a first-degree murder charge, either be tried as a juvenile or an adult. That's an important distinction. No crime if he's under 10, but he is 10. Look, you just got to pick a number at some point, right? Unless you want to have everyone eligible to be tried, which you're not going to have, because obviously a 2-year-old's not going to be tried for a crime, right? You have to pick a number. The number is 10. He's over 10. Therefore, he can be charged with a crime. So then the second question becomes, which system is he going to be in? Is he going to be in the juvenile system, or is he going to be in the adult system? In a lot of states, 18 is the age of majority. So that's the point where you sort of become an adult. And if you commit a crime, it's charged as an adult crime by law. In Wisconsin, the age is actually 17, which I think is interesting. I don't know why states pick different numbers. I know in Alabama and Utah, now you have to be 21 to buy cigarettes, I guess. That's like a national law now. But there was a time where that wasn't the case. But in Utah, Alaska, and Alabama, you had to be 19. So 18 wasn't good enough. Most states, it was 18. Apparently in Wisconsin, it's 17. Different states have different numbers. But just because you're under 17 doesn't mean you're going to be tried as a juvenile, particularly for bad, heinous cases such as this one. And in Wisconsin, they sort of have this broken into groups. So from 10 to 14, all crimes are charged as a juvenile, with one exception. And that exception is murder. If this is a murder case and you are over 10, it is automatically charged as an adult crime. So that's an important thing. Nobody decided we're going to charge that 10-year-old. By law, murder is charged as an adult crime. We can talk about whether that's a good idea or not in a second. Interestingly, that does not mean that this will go forward as an adult crime. So we talk about presumptions sometimes in the law. Just because there's a presumption doesn't mean it can't be overcome. In Wisconsin, the automatic presumption is you commit a murder, you're going to be tried as an adult. If it were another crime, you would be tried as a juvenile. That would be the presumption. But let's take that case. Let's say this were a rape. Say a 13-year-old committed a rape. So the presumption is you're under 14, juvenile court. But the prosecutor, if they looked at the case and they thought it was particularly heinous, they could seek to have it waived into adult court. So they could seek to have it tried as an adult case. This, you have something called reverse waiver. Since it's automatic that it goes to adult court, if the state looks at this case and eventually decides, for whatever reason, this really needs to be a juvenile case, they can actually have a hearing, go to the court, make their arguments, and say this should be waived back to juvenile court. And even though it's a murder, it can be tried in juvenile court. That is something that will be decided at some point in the future. If the status quo is maintained and this child goes forward and is charged in an adult court and is convicted, he faces up to 60 years in prison. Now, it's kind of funny. People obviously don't know how this works. And so I saw somebody on Twitter who was just shocked that they would put a 10-year-old in an adult prison. That's not how it works either. So what would happen is he would be convicted, he would be sentenced, he would then go to a juvenile facility. And he would stay in that juvenile facility until he was 17. And at that point, he would be transferred to an adult facility, just like every other 17-year-old who's convicted of a new crime. So they won't be putting, the 10-year-old in the maximum security prison with the 50-year-old serial killer. That's not going to happen. He will start in a juvenile facility. It's just the distinction is if he's tried and convicted as a juvenile, when he turns 17, he's going to be released. Whereas if he's tried as an adult and he's sentenced, once he turns 17, he will just be transferred to an adult prison.
Yeah, so that's a really important distinction there. So you're only seeing the effects at age 17. He's going to be in that juvenile prison if he's convicted, whether tried as a juvenile or as an adult. But basically, the reason the status quo exists for murder charges that you automatically default into the adult court is to say this is such a serious crime, no matter your age, as long as you're above the minimum age that they chose, age 10, we don't want, we treat it very seriously, and you don't just get to be released at 17. And part of the thinking behind juvenile courts that allow release at 17 is that you're still a child, you're not fully formed, your, parts of the brain for decision making and impulse control, all those things are still very young and need to be formed. And there's a chance for you to be rehabilitated and to kind of catch up with your peers in terms of that ability to control your impulses to commit crimes. And we're not going to hold it against you. But for the time being, since you seem to be lacking behind other juveniles at your same age, we want to protect the society that you're in. So we'll keep you off the streets in juvenile detention, but we have hope that you will basically reach adulthood and be a functioning member of society and in a way give you a blank slate, have you start anew with, your new adulthood. But with murder, at least with Wisconsin, they're saying, no, this is too serious. No 10-year-old, no 14-year-old, no 16-year-old should be committing these murders. And so we treat you as an adult. And even at 17, you don't get to go out into free society. You're too much of a danger. Your sentence will continue. Now you'll just be serving it in adult prison.
And I think when you think about this, it's important to think about it the way Alice just described it. The whole idea here is you're a child, and even if you did something that in adult society we think is serious enough that you should lose 5, 10, 15, 20 years of your life in prison because of what you did, and because of how dangerous you are, because you're a child, we want to give you another opportunity. We want to say, look, we want you to, to straighten out your life and to realize what you're doing and realize the path you're headed on and turn things around and give you a second chance without this on your record. A lot of times juvenile records are sealed. And one of the reasons we have to talk in so many generalities here is because every state is different. Every jurisdiction is different. Where you are practicing, where your crimes are committed will affect all this. But in any event, somebody said, I was reading some commentary about this, and one person was saying that it just feels like in this case that the system has failed if they're just going to throw him into adult court. What's the even point of having the juvenile system? And yes, the system absolutely fails because it's not designed for this. The juvenile system is not designed for murder, period. It's just not. That is not the idea there. Once you've committed murder, you've kind of already gone as far as you can go. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't, in sort of extreme circumstances, give you a second chance. You commit a murder when you're 15 and you're out when you're 17. That doesn't really seem like justice. But if we're really convinced that this is as a result of you being a juvenile and you being foolish in how you've acted, and we want to give you a second chance and give you that expunged record, even though you murdered somebody, we can do that. But that's not really what the juvenile system is set up for. The juvenile system is really set up for, minor crimes.
For like truancy, like you not going to school and you sneaking out at night and riding around with your buddies and maybe even doing something like carjacking, which is a very serious adult crime. But maybe you were a stupid 14-year-old who, carjacked a car in a parking lot and joy rode with your friends around at night and didn't really do anything bad. You didn't hurt anybody. You didn't, it's bad to steal a car, of course, but you can kind of put it into the bucket of extreme immaturity. But let's not have this stupid carjacking at age 14 where you just wanted to joyride a cool Mustang for a night, ruin the rest of your life. That's what juvenile court really is for.
And there are just certain crimes that it shouldn't really matter how old you are or how well developed your brain is. And I hear this so often. Well, your brain's not even developed till you're 25. Okay, great. That's wonderful. You still shouldn't kill people. And there's really no circumstance in which you should think that killing people is okay. It's one thing to, like Alice said, stupidly steal a car or break into somebody's house and steal a television or shoplift or do all the dumb things that everybody does when they're kids because you're testing the limits and it's kind of cool to be transgressive and do the thing you're not supposed to do. And you're not really thinking about the consequences or how you're going to have to put this on a, job application in 20 years. We want to prevent that. We don't want the really dumb, stupid thing you did when you were a 15-year-old smoking pot behind the mall and deciding to, steal the motorcycle over there. We don't want that to ruin the rest of your life. That's the point. But there's really no circumstance in which you should be raping and murdering people. That's just not, you shouldn't be doing that. And the juvenile system is not really designed for that. So even if you're a 10-year-old and you decide you're going to kill someone, and you decide you're going to kill someone, that is something that is just so far beyond what we're trying to do here that it's hard to even imagine the juvenile system handling it. And I think you need to think about that when you think about this case, because I think the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of people was, this is horrible, this is terrible, how could you ever prosecute a 10-year-old as an adult? But I think you really have to take a step back and think about these cases and think about what they mean and think about, frankly, the purpose of the justice system and sentencing in general before you can really make a concrete decision on what should happen here.
And the other thing about this is, unfortunately, this particular situation is not one of first impression. This is not the first time, a child of this age has been charged with an adult crime and sentenced to a long time. This is actually the second case recently in Wisconsin involving a child committing murder. You may have remembered this very, very sad story, but in April of 2022, Lily Peters was raped and murdered in Chippewa Falls, and the perpetrator was her cousin, who was 14 years old. His name is Carson Petersberger. Now, Petersberger had lured his cousin, Lily, onto a trail, I think behind one of their relatives' houses, where he had planned the murder, so premeditated, kind of like this case, and he beat her with a stick, strangled her until she was dead, and then he raped her dead body. Now, he was charged with murder, which in Wisconsin, of course, meant it was an adult court. It did not get waived back to juvenile court, and he is facing a sentence of life in prison. So he's currently serving it in juvenile detention. When he turns 17, he will then continue to serve that sentence, but in adult prison, and he is supposed to serve his entire life. So this isn't the first time it's happened, and this is sad this has happened just twice in the last year and in the same state. So there is precedent for what we're seeing here.
And look, he's 14. That's not that much older than 10. I mean, it is older, and you'd expect a 14-year-old to have, a better sense of right and wrong and everything else than a 10-year-old, but he's still only 14. A lot of the arguments you can make against charging the 10-year-old, you can also make against charging the 14-year-old. And I don't think there's anybody, I could be probably wrong about this because there's always somebody, but I don't think there are many people who think that, he should have been charged as a juvenile and out when he's 17 after what he did. I think pretty much everybody thought this guy, something's wrong and he needs to go away forever. Sorry. You don't overcome that. I don't care how young you are. There should not be a time in the future where all of a sudden, we decide we're going to give you another chance. And there are some really serious cases that people know about where this kind of thing has happened. And you all know of cases. There was this one case, and the name escapes me, in Britain where two young boys lured a third younger boy out of a department store and took him to a train track and killed him, beat him to death, left him on the train track and hoped that a train would run over him and that would cover up their crime. And that way no one would know that they did it. And they, of course, were caught, but because they were juveniles, they eventually were released. And I think it's sort of an interesting study because one of them went on to have a fairly normal life. The other one has been in trouble with the police ever since and has been in and out of prison. And it's one of those things, it was very controversial in Britain. Was this something that should have happened? Should these people have ever been released, or should they have been in prison for the rest of their lives? I don't know. I don't know the answers to these questions. We could talk about the Slender Man case in the United States, where two girls who were very clearly suffering from some mental illness believed that the fictional character, the Slender Man, wanted them to murder one of their best friends, and they tried to kill her, and I think she came within like a millimeter of dying. Basically, the knife wound missed the aorta, and she survived. But they both went to jail for a very long time, and one of them was recently released, I think a couple years ago. One of them is still in prison, and that was controversial. Should that girl have been released? These are questions that are impossible to answer. I just don't think I don't know if I want to say there's no right answer, because I actually think the right answer is they probably need to be in prison for a very long time. But I don't feel so confident in it that I really understand the outrage of people. I guess that's the thing. I see people get outraged about things, and I'm never really sure why. So this is one of those cases where people got outraged that this 10-year-old was charged with murder, and I was kind of like, I don't really want him out on the street. And I think that leads to what I think is an important part of this, Alice, and that's the purposes of sentencing. Like, why do we put people in prison in the first place? We know we do it when someone commits a crime, but why do we do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's multifactored. It's not just for crime and punishment. Of course, that's an element, but if you've ever sat through a sentencing hearing, you'll hear a lot of these factors discussed. And, we'll talk through each of them, but generally what you're considering for sentencing are a defendant's danger to the community, the seriousness of the crime, the culpability of the killer in this case, and also the need for treatment, mental health, that kind of goes in with the culpability of someone. Those are the main things, and you'll have sentencing guidelines and sentencing factors in both the federal and state statutes that help guide judges and also the attorneys in talking about how to weigh these factors. There's not one factor that is more important than another, but really they're all kind of in relation to each other. And what you're trying to get at is something that is just for the crime that has been committed, just for the defendant, just for society, just for the victim. And also at the same time, keeping in mind the effect that one person's sentence may have on an entire society. What do I mean by that? Obviously, there is the defendant who gets the sentence. They have to serve out that sentence. That's a kind of one-on-one, what it does to the one person's life. But then there's also the effect of deterrence. What this one person's case will do to deter other people who may be thinking about committing a crime. There's always risk-benefit analysis in someone's head if they're acting as a rational person. Even when you're acting irrationally, there are certain things that weigh into whether you're going to do it or not. For example, stealing bikes is like a very, very prevalent crime, partly because it's very difficult to track down bike parts to prosecute people who steal bikes. So like in cities, one of the I think most prevalent street low-level crimes is bike stealing, because you can sell it for parts and it's really hard to trace individual tires and bike seats and bike chains. And the cost of a bike is not so great that, the FBI gets turned on the bike stealer of this neighborhood. And because the rate of getting caught and the punishment for stealing bikes is relatively low, the risk is relatively low, and that probably feeds into why so many bikes are stolen, especially in urban areas. Now, imagine if a bunch of kids were thinking about stealing a bike, but they saw that so-and-so down the street did steal a bike and got popped for it and got a really stiff sentence for it. They might think twice about stealing the next bike, because is it worth making $25 on Craigslist selling bike parts if it means you might have to spend a year or 2 years in jail? That might not be worth it. And so there is the deterrent effect, of course, of a sentence on the greater population, and then the danger to the community, right? When we're talking especially about murder, the greatest fear of any judge or prosecutor, and I would think defense attorney as well, but they are in a slightly different position because they're advocating for their client, is, I know my worst nightmare as a prosecutor was I knew I had a dangerous person on my hands, and if I did not do everything I could to make sure the people who were going to be at risk if this person was out wasn't protected. So if I had a dangerous defendant who I knew beat his girlfriend who he lived with, I would make sure that I would be advocating strongly for protections if he were allowed out, not to have contact with that girlfriend, because I would be afraid for her safety and also the greater community. And here we're talking about someone who is dangerous, because this isn't heat of the moment murder. This is a kind of cold-blooded, premeditated, remorseless murder. Kind of the worst case murder you can think of in terms of dangerousness to society. So I just touched on a couple of the factors that you think about, but there is no exact science. There's no great formula that you get to plug in, 10 years old, killed with pistol, ordered Amazon. What's the correct sentence? That doesn't exist because we are a subjective system when it comes to sentencing. But these are important questions to have, that lawyers will file briefs arguing for their, why one factor should weigh more heavily or less heavily. And there is usually oral argument among the attorneys and the judge to discuss the interaction of all of these factors.
And as usual, Alice makes all the best points, so I'm just going to restate what she already said.
You just lobbed it up to me so beautifully,
well,
Brett.
I do what I can, Alice.
Thanks for the set.
It's funny the way different people look at things. It kind of makes the world go around, right? And got a lot of different people out there who look at things differently, and that's a good thing. And when this case came up, I thought it was really an interesting example of that, because when people saw this, a lot of people's first thought was, wow, charge a 10-year-old as an adult. That seems bad. My first thought when I saw it was, wow, a 10-year-old killed someone. He's dangerous. And the dangerousness matters more to me. That my concern for him, I have some. He's 10. There's some obvious sympathy there. That is way below my concern for the people around him. My concern for the people around him and his community is very high, because he is dangerous and he needs to be locked up until he's not dangerous. That can include the kind of services that he'll get in the juvenile system and the services that are also available in the adult system. But to me, I would much rather have the flexibility that often comes with charging him as an adult than I would as a juvenile. I would hate to be the judge watching this kid grow up. I mean, let's say tomorrow he pleads guilty as a juvenile and he's sentenced to 7 years in juvenile detention to be released upon his 17th birthday. Wouldn't you hate to be the judge who watches that case and he's getting close to 17 and all the reports are he's not any better, he's just as dangerous as he always was, he's still got all these mental health issues, but he's 17, he's no longer under our control. He's now a free man. He's free to go. And we can't tell him to go to get mental health treatment, and we can't hold him, and we can't do anything. And now he's just a ticking time bomb walking around in the world. And guess what? His record is sealed. So even the people around him won't necessarily know just how dangerous he is. The girl who starts to date him won't know just how dangerous he is. The roommate who's living with him, the boss who gets mad at him and maybe says the wrong thing to him. None of those people will know that they have this ticking time bomb in their world who has already murdered once because he didn't get what he wanted. And to me, that's a much better consideration than his age. I am much more concerned with that. And state court judges often have a lot of power. I think if this kid ends up being tried as an adult, and which I think he will, and convicted, what will end up happening is he will be in a situation where eventually he'll be in the adult system and he probably will be eligible for parole, and one day he may be paroled. A case a lot of you are probably familiar with is the Eric Smith case. Eric Smith, he was 13 when he tortured and murdered I think a 3-year-old. Terrible case, horrible facts. He was tried as an adult. He was sentenced to life, but he had parole. And in fact, after I think serving about 30 years in prison, he was released early in 2022. And a lot of people really didn't like that. They were very mad about that fact because of the case itself. And I get that. But once again, really difficult case. Should the 13-year-old, should the 40-year-old man necessarily still be held responsible for what he did when he was 13, particularly if after some treatment and some growth and some maturity, he's no longer dangerous? I don't know. That's a hard philosophical question. But much better to have that philosophical question answered at 43 than at 18. And in my mind, in this case, the adult system is exactly where this kid needs to be. I hope he stays there, and I hope eventually, I hope eventually he does get to a point where he realizes the just incredibly terrible thing he did and is remorseful for it, and isn't dangerous anymore and isn't violent anymore, and maybe one day he can be released. But it's very hard for me to imagine a situation in which his 17th birthday is the day where he needs to be released.
Yeah, I think that's right here. Especially, and clearly we know that this boy has mental issues. Just because he goes to juvenile detention and then adult prison doesn't mean he doesn't get treatment. In fact, it might be part of his sentence to get certain amount of, counseling or therapy along those lines. But it also ensures that while he's getting that treatment, which he was getting before the murder, he is not a danger to society. And so those are not mutually exclusive things. You may argue, how good the therapy is in prison or in juvenile detention, but he was given a chance to basically have therapy. And when he was out having therapy and under the treatment of a doctor, he was able to commit such a dangerous crime. And there's no reason to believe he won't do it again because of the lack of remorse and the continued lack of remorse, in fact. And so for the sake of all those around him, because he's too young to live by himself, he has to live with someone. He probably has to live with his grandparents, who are even more elderly than his mother, who may not be physically able to control someone who is able to act out in such a rageful manner. It seems like a ticking time bomb, really. And I do think it was in this situation, it's correct that he's charged in adult court, and we'll see how the system plays out. And like you said, Brett, gosh, for him and his entire family, how devastating for this family to have lost his mother in such a horrific manner, and to have it be at the hands of her son is, I can only imagine, any family's worst nightmare. I hope that he does get the treatment he needs, but I'm not willing to sacrifice kind of the safety of those around him in the community by giving him a quote-unquote second chance by going to juvenile court.
And I think one thing to remember is if he is tried as an adult, he'll have the same defenses that anyone else would have. If he is truly insane, for instance, he can make that claim, and he might end up serving his time or, being found not guilty by reason of insanity, at which point he would be in a hospital, in a high security hospital setting until he's ready to sort of re-enter society. I mean, there are lots of different options for how this will go, but I think Alice is 100% correct. It reminds me of Ed Kemper. A lot of you know who Ed Kemper is. Serial killer. If you watch Mindhunter, he has a very big role. A lot of people know about serial killings that he committed. He was the co-ed killer, I think. I forget his name. He killed a lot of people. But before he killed a lot of people, he killed his grandparents when he was 14 or 15. He killed both his grandparents with a shotgun and arrested, charged for murder. He was released when he was 21. He probably should have stayed in prison for the rest of his life. We all would have been better off if he had have been. His mother certainly would have, who eventually decapitated. So I think you really have to be careful with these cases. The knee-jerk, he's only 10, we can't hold him responsible, that is not the way to deal with this. This has to be dealt with at a much deeper level, and I just think it is a level that only the adult system can deal with it. And I think that's what will end up happening. We'll keep following the case. We'll let you know if there are any updates with how exactly this goes. But, I mean, a terrible case, a tragic case, and sounds like, the thing is, it seems like this was a ticking time bomb before this happened. If you look at, his mom installing the cameras, he's already lighting things on fire. He's having a lot of rage issues. He was a ticking time bomb. He went off. He's gone off once. Let's not set him up to go off again and then be talking about how this was a warning flag everybody should have recognized, but they didn't because he was only 10.
Yeah, no, well, definitely. And I would assume that if his attorney hasn't filed for it, they'll be asking to go to the juvenile court. But again, like you said, I don't think it's going to be successful, and that's probably the right outcome. Well, we'll update you if there's any developments in this case, and we welcome your questions about the juvenile system and also kind of the justness of a situation like this, a 10-year-old being tried in adult court. But hopefully you have a better understanding of what it means to be charged in adult court, what it means needs to be treated as an adult for the legal system. But before we sign off for the day, Brett, do you have anything else to add?
No, just Happy New Year, Alice.
Happy New Year, Brett. It's so good to talk to you again. Well, until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I saw the package and I looked at the to address and it wasn't my address. It was a little bit weird. And so I almost was going to put it out, but then I was like, it's so small. That's not even an address. So I opened it and I was like, oh, this must be a product. So I can talk about it because literally just walked in and said, smell this.
Oh, well, there you go. Thank you for helping us out with our ads.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. Do you want me to start and then you can do that?
not mention other deodorants by name.
I won't mention any competitors. I won't be like,
Make any help. Okay, you can go. You can start.
I don't know.